DG Grow and DG ENVI on the findings of the fitness check of the most relevant chemicals legislation, which would include REACH and the identified challenges, gaps and weaknesses. And we'll have an opportunity to have a Q&A session with the two representatives from the Commission who are here today. I'm going to give the Commission, I give 10 minutes to both, or 10 minutes in total? Okay, so if I give 10 minutes to the Commission, that's 5 minutes each, please. First, I will give the floor to Mr. Pettinelli of DG Grow, and then to Mr. Sadauskas of DG ENVI. So please, Mr. Pettinelli.
Yes, thank you, Chair, honourable members. The European Union started to work on hazardous chemicals 50 years ago. Action at the EU level in the area of chemicals has been driven by its commitment to ensure a high level of protection of human health and the environment, as well as an efficiently functioning of the internal market. The current legal framework covers chemicals in industrial activities, occupational settings, consumer products, pesticides, fertilizers, waste and water, from the moment they are produced to when they are used and after their release into the environment. The fitness check answered to the following three questions. What has the European Union achieved in the area of chemicals? How do more than 40 directives and regulations that each contains one or more provisions on chemicals fit and perform together? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the EU chemicals legislation? Our assessment covers all the steps of the decision-making process at the European level, from hazard identification to decision on risk management measures. We also looked at the implementation and enforcement of the rules by Member States. This fitness check complements the evaluation of the REACH legislation that was published last year. Together, these two evaluations cover the entire EU chemical legislation. The fitness check concludes that overall, the EU chemical legislation is fit for dealing with the complexity of chemical hazards and risks. It reflects 50 years of continuous efforts, strong commitment and progress. The EU added value in the area of chemicals is clearly high. Our chemicals policy and our decision-making process are a source of inspiration for many countries outside of Europe. Decision-making at EU level, harmonization and common standards ensure an equal level of protection of human health and the environment across the European Union. That has also strengthened the internal market and increased the overall efficiency via sharing knowledge and resources. But we did identify some scope for improvement when it comes to the availability of resources for implementation and enforcement of the legislation, and to our capacity to cooperate. Regarding articles imported into the European Union, public authorities struggle with ensuring both overall consumer protection and fair competition between EU and non-EU companies. This includes online sales. The share of products sold online is constantly increasing. A lot of them are coming from abroad. Economic actors cannot guarantee that products sold via their online platform do not contain non-authorized hazardous chemicals. Essential hazard and safety information is also often incomplete or even missing. The level of compliance with the rules depends on whether economic actors understand them and whether they are able to keep with the change in legislation. Clarity of the rules facilitate and increase compliance. This is especially important for smaller economic actors who usually struggle more in these regards because of resource constraints. There are still some inefficiencies in the assessment of hazards and risks carried out by the EU scientific agencies. Additional efficiency gains could result from assessing hazardous chemicals in groups rather than individually and in isolated contexts. European companies will face challenge due to the globalization and the strong growth in the production of chemicals outside Europe. Other challenges will come from rapid technological change like digitalization and increased focus on sustainability. The fast-evolving geopolitical and economic context will challenge Europe's current global leadership on sustainability and sound management of chemicals and waste. To face this challenge, we can build on the high level of technological development of the chemicals industry and its skilled and talented workforce. We can build on the internal market that is one of the biggest markets in the world. It protects consumers across the EU and allows them to make informed choice. EU citizens in general have much greater confidence in the chemical safety of products manufactured in the EU compared to those imported. And we can make much better use of smart technologies. They will allow us to continue to take appropriate decisions. They will also improve the way we communicate information to consumers and economic actors across value chains, and they can improve enforcement and market surveillance. And after these views, I'll give the floor to my colleague Kestutis. Please, Kestutis.
Thank you, Carlo. In terms of protection of health and environment, this evaluation shows that EU chemicals legislation has led to many notable achievements. For instance, exposures of citizens and the environment to heavy metals, asbestos, polychlorinated biphenyls, benzene have been significantly reduced. At the same time, we have a number of very worrying growing trends, such as insect and bird population have been declining dramatically, up to 50% in some instances over the last several decades. Male fertility problems are growing at an alarming rate in Europe. The incident rate of certain types of cancer and neurological diseases continue to increase among our citizens. All these trends have multiple causal factors. Chemicals are known, or at least are strongly suspected, to contribute to these adverse effects. Our evaluation tells us clearly what are the main policy challenges to be addressed. One is consistency of regulatory measures, which is paramount to guarantee an adequate level of protection, in particular for vulnerable groups. The lack of a horizontal approach can lead to uneven protection for the same vulnerable group between different pieces of legislation. For example, on endocrine disruptors, where right now we have a targeted cross-cutting fitness check ongoing, and it will allow identify gaps, inconsistencies, or synergies. Two, the identification and management of emerging risks, and that requires specific attention. It could be supported by a European early warning system to identify and alert decision makers on time about emerging risks. Three, the current state of knowledge about exposure to hazardous chemicals and their impact on health and environment needs to be improved. We need more data on hazardous chemicals, their uses, their fate, and exposure. Four, better information and tracking of hazardous substances in articles is required. This is also needed for the circular economy. And five, we do not have evidence that the current legislation has driven the substitution of hazardous chemicals at a significant rate. So stronger support to green chemistry will be critical to the sustainability and competitiveness of EU chemicals industry in the future. As Carlo Pettinelli has said, the EU chemicals legislation has proven to be most probably the most ambitious and effective in the world. It guarantees a high level of protection to citizens and environment, and we should be proud of it. But challenges are still many. They are linked to fundamental global economic, societal, and environmental issues. In June, Commission organized a high-level conference to discuss the future of the chemicals policy, and together with the findings of the fitness check of the last year's REACH review, very useful inputs received by various stakeholders will feed into a more general reflection on the future of chemicals policy. The President-elect of the European Commission has already outlined within her priorities the need to tackle hazardous chemicals and endocrine disruptors as part of broad ambition towards a zero pollution Europe. The next Commission has thus a strong basis to define its vision and objectives for the future of European Union's chemicals policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have, with had three indications so far, so keep those. Okay, we have many indications. I'm going to go first to Peter. You first.
Yeah, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much to the Commission. REACH and the implementation of REACH is important in order to protect citizens against dangerous substances. And let me emphasize that it's important that the EU addresses such matters, so it's not done at a national level. The chemical industry was not enthusiastic about REACH, to say it in polite terms. But if you discuss this now with the representatives of the sector, is that the most important thing about Brexit is that REACH will continue to apply in the UK, that they don't have an individual system with all of the problems with having different production procedures and different regulations. So that's why it's important to have uniform legislation within the single market. At the same time, it's important, and the Commission indicated this as well, that this should not be addressed in an absolutist fashion. In other words, you have to look at the overall impact. And if a substance during the production procedure is used, it doesn't necessarily mean it's dangerous to humans, and that has to be prohibited. I can give two examples with which I've had a lot of experience, and the Commission is aware of this, that we have problems with it. The first situation with chrome, and we had a very close debate on that in Parliament. Some people wanted to prohibit a certain form of chrome. However, there was no danger to the consumer. It was just used in production and was not dangerous if used correctly. If we had a prohibition of this in Europe, then we would have to have the products imported from third countries. And so this is, of course, not better for the environment because the regulations aren't that strict abroad. If the second situation is microplastics, if we have a prohibition, this could have significant impacts. For example, we're talking about artificial grass. The alternatives could be very dangerous for the athletes. They could have additional injuries. So we can't make it impossible to enjoy sports just because of our chemical legislation. So we need to have long transitional periods. We have to have innovative technology. And so I'd like to request the Commission that they look at this in a balanced way and not just say, well, if this substance is dangerous in one situation, it has to be prohibited. You have to look at this in the overall perspective and see what kinds of alternatives are available. That's included in REACH, and I think we should continue to pursue that principle.
Ms. Hazekamp.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Dank aan de Europese...
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the Commission for that information. A thorough upgrading of the legislation is vital. We need a proper overstructure. Now, of course, if chemicals are dangerous to infants in milk bottles, they must also be banned from toys. What about cocktails of chemicals? You have thousands of people dying early every year. That's quite unacceptable. We have to be more ambitious and take a more urgent approach in banning chemicals right across the board in legislation. Our party is just as forthright in wanting to ban tests on animals. In risk assessment, you can have a cleaner circular economy if you do without these dangerous substances. If we allow them to continue, we're losing a whole generation's worth of health. Listen to objective scientists and leave the chemical lobby outside the room. As the expert has said, there is no proper balance, and that has to stop.
Dank u wel. Crystal Schaldemose, please.
Mange tak for det.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for putting this topic on the agenda. It's very important to discuss our chemical legislation within the EU. And I also think that it's important, just like we heard, that there is a need for having stricter legislation and better chemical legislation. I don't know if it's reached even that we're discussing right now, because we have to be faster to react, even when we're talking about individual substances when there's a problem. And if we run the risk of having some member states making individual prohibitions, I understand that they would do so if there's dangerous substance. For example, the new Danish government has decided to prohibit fluorine substances in baking paper and baking parchment, because we know there are some chemicals there that can then be transferred to food. So there is a need to react quickly. And if the EU doesn't react quickly, then the member states react quickly. And I think we need a fast track for some of these substances. So when we have studies that show that there is a risk for human health, then we should be able to react now, not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, now. So I think it's important to make sure that the individual member states aren't having to react more quickly, and then we distort the single market. So I think we should have the best protection throughout the world. But even though it's not always good enough, and I think there's room for improvement. So I think it's very important that it's significant to include this in the upcoming Commission program. We need a new approach to chemical policy so we can react faster when we see individual substances that are dangerous, especially if these are substances that have contact to citizens in their daily life. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rees.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous disposons clairement.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's be clear about this. We clearly have the best legislation on chemicals, as has been mentioned by the Commission representative. I think we can quite rightly feel shared pride in this. There are points of friction with the outgoing Commission, though. We talked about endocrine disruptors. I'm delighted to hear the Commission representative say that quality stock taking is underway. If you look at what happened with the renewal of the authorization of glyphosate, for example, and our demands on pesticide following the work of our special committee, nonetheless, I want to speak on behalf of my colleague, Mr. Lucic, who can't join us this morning and apologizes for his absence. I want to share his questions in English.
That some materials, including plastics, which come in contact with our food, may contain substances which are carcinogenic, endocrine disruptors, or of other concerns. When will the Commission finally deliver a comprehensive and ambitious legislative proposal amending the food contact material regulation to tackle this pressing issue? I've heard, well, my colleague has heard, that a proposal will be published for 2020. Could you please confirm it? Second question, poor implementation by the member states has been identified by the Commission as a major barrier for achieving the goals of chemical and product legislation concerning toys, for example, this has been said before, or cosmetics to protect against harmful chemicals. How has the Commission tackled these implementation deficits? And last question, this fitness check shows that despite the robustness of our legislation, there is no shift towards less dangerous chemicals. According to the final report, in 2016, around 60% of the total production of chemicals classified as hazardous for the environment and around 40% for health. This excessive exposure to mix of chemicals account for thousands of premature deaths in Europe and biodiversity loss. What has the Commission done to reverse this trend? Merci beaucoup.
Merci bien. Normally, we obviously have a long list of questioners, and then we have the Commission respond at the end. The list is relatively short for this round, so I'm going to... there's a few more names. There's 3 more colleagues who wish to ask questions. But I want, because there's a lot of detail in these questions, I want to ensure that the answers are given. So after, we're running ahead of schedule, so we'll have the opportunity to hear back from the Commission after the next 3 questioners, and then we'll have the opportunity to have more colleagues come in. So if I could now ask Ms. Paulus, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the work on these refits. You really put in a lot of scrutiny and expert knowledge in the report. I don't know who of you has had a look at this document. Actually, you did 4 years of study in order to find out we need more data, especially on hazardous chemicals and endocrine disruptors which affect human health and also biodiversity. You found out that the precautionary principle is addressed but not extensively applied. You found out that substances of high concern are present in everyday articles, affecting consumer health and also hampering circular economy, which has already been pointed out. That pesticides stay on the market because the member states surpass the deadlines which were promised to the suppliers, and many issues more about combination effects, about consistency of actions to protect vulnerable population groups, and so on. And so I'm a bit surprised on the conclusions or the action plans, because I didn't find any. I couldn't find a vision for a sustainable chemical legislation, actually, which really addresses human health and preservation of natural resources, which are the base of a survival, because those seem to be less important than the common market, which I find a bit disturbing. And also, you have addressed missing scientific knowledge. And my question is, what action will be taken on that? Also, there's still no outline for a non-toxic environment, and I think the strategy should have been presented by the Commission in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, and I would be interested to know when we can expect this. And lastly, could you elaborate a bit on the zero pollution strategy, which Ms. von der Leyen has promised, and you have mentioned it, and you certainly have a plan for it, don't you? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Novak.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've spoken with many people who work in agriculture, and they have all guaranteed me that they are very satisfied with the legislation. When it comes to phytopharmaceuticals, they have received trainings, further education, and traceability has been improved. Those are the pluses. However, there are also some negative aspects, especially when it comes to managing wastes and storing wastes. There is no unified classification for that, and there are different measurement units used. Sometimes it's kilograms, sometimes it's tons, and then on the other hand, we are measuring in cubic meters and liters. It is not unified. I would like to ask the Commission whether you have foreseen some new actions in the field of managing waste and storing waste. Will there be a more unified classification for these items? Thank you.
Jutta Land.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Commission. I have a few questions for you. I think my colleague treated you gentle, and I think I will be the bad cop here today, because I'm actually disappointed. From looking at the findings in the fitness check, you can only get the impression that things are working well. You get the impression that, okay, some problems, but in general, we have a very good regulation here. And they state, you state that the chemicals legislation is fit for purpose, delivers a high level of protection for people and the environment. But let's face it, that's not the situation here. We see that we have a rise in Europe of very serious diseases, and we see a link to chemicals. And so my question is very easy for you to answer. If everything is working so well, how does the Commission explain that the diseases linked to the exposure of chemicals are in rise in Europe? We see this not at least with the endocrine disrupting chemicals and their effect on the public health. And that brings me to my second question. Why is the Commission not acting to expand the protection against endocrine disruptors so that all sectors in society is covered, such as plastic, textiles, drinking water, cosmetics? We know that people are not protected today, and it harms their health. We want to see more action from you. And I also have a question of compliance. According to a recent study by the German Federal Institute of Risk Assessment and the German Environment Agency, a third of the high production volume chemicals made or imported to Europe since 2010 break EU laws designed to protect public and the environment from harmful exposure. Just 31% were declared as legally compliant, with the rest needing more investigation. And the REACH regulation obliges companies to report to ECHA whether their substances are causing cancer, neurotoxic, mutagenic, bioaccumulative, or harmful to children or human fertility. So why is it that the Commission is authorizing substances although the required information is missing? And my last question, finally. The S&D Group wants to know when the Commission intends to present a long overdue EU strategy for non-toxic environment. People have the right not to be exposed of dangerous chemicals. It is easy to talk the talk, but we need you to actually also walk the walk and deliver, because we need to strengthen the protection for Europe's citizens and environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very conscious that we've had a lot of detail in the questions, and I want to make sure that the questions that have been asked get a proper answer. Not saying that you wouldn't give a proper answer, but what does happen a lot in these sessions is that we have a long list of questions with a lot of detail and then only a short period at the end for the Commission to answer. As we are running ahead of schedule, I'd like to invite the Commission to respond to the questions that have been put so far. I'm aware of additional speakers for the next round. I will give priority to new speakers in the next round, but if you have asked a question and you feel that your question hasn't been fully answered, please do raise your hand again to have the opportunity to seek an answer for the second time. Mr. Pettinelli and Mr. Sadauskas, I'm going to propose 10 minutes to answer what we've heard so far between you, if that's acceptable to you, and then we'll go back for more questions from my colleagues. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Concerning the consideration of Mr. Lees, I would like to say that this is exactly the functioning of the REACH regulation. The REACH regulation tries to take in account all the aspects, and for this reason in the HECA agency there are two committees. There is the Risk Assessment Committee and the other committee, the SEAC, that assess the social and economic impact. After these committees, they draw the conclusion, and the Commission take the decision based on all this information. So the economic and societal aspects are taken into account, and we try to find the better balance. Of course, sometimes the better balance is something that is rather subjective, because what is the better balance for someone is not for others. And we see also before the summer for some opinion on chromates, because chromates has been mentioned, that there are several, there are different views also in the Parliament. Concerning the enforcement, of course, is a challenge because the regulation is very complex and the players are very different. There are big companies and SMEs, and most of enforcement is for member states because they have the authority for enforcing rules. So what we are trying at European level, we are making our rules clearer and simpler. We try to avoid duplication and effort when we assess the hazard and risk of substances, or when companies need to generate data for such assessments that could improve the implementation and enforcement. The new president-elect in her political agenda has announced the intention to focus on tighter enforcement. So she says that Europe will always fight for a level playing field and will be strong against those who compete by dumping the regulation or subsiding. This is for the external trade. So we will need now to give a follow-up to this political aspiration. As you know, the process for setting up the new commission is still in the preparatory phase, so we cannot give a detailed information simply because these do not exist, not because we don't want to give information, but the work is ongoing and there is already a commitment from the President. About food contact materials, there is some work that is already ongoing. There is an evaluation study that is ongoing. And this evaluation will look also on how to address the issue in a coherent way that can assure an even more protection to consumers. But we should say that for food contact materials, there is already a very demanding regulation that already give a high level of protection. Of course, maybe we can do better, and we are, for this reason, we are making an evaluation, but we are not starting from the scratch. And there is also another study, independent external study on this matter that will be finalized soon, and when finalized, it will be published. Concerning the compliance and the German study that has been published on the media, yes, this is a concern. Of course, this is also related to the availability of resources because the number of files that have been submitted is extremely high. So the European Chemicals Agency is obliged to work by sampling, but of course we have taken the result of this study very seriously. So now the agency is preparing an action plan. The action plan, I think, is quite ready, and we will start as soon as possible with the implementation for further improving the assessment of files that are submitted for the agency. And for the other questions, I let my colleague Gestutis to answer.
Thank you, Carlo. And as regards the animal testing, I think there is an equivocal commitment by European Union, as well as the legal requirements, to reduce animal testing, which is still happening because we don't have always fully functional alternative methods, but those methods are increasing. Animal testing in principle is going downwards, but there will be an opportunity to discuss it once we have produced in the next months the report of Laboratory Animals Directive. This is where we will be showing what the progress is and what the challenges are. As regards to the question why Commission and European Union is not acting faster, and the fluorinated substances have been given as example, it's the right example. Indeed, this is what fitness check has found, is that efficiency can really be improved in the action, and in some cases it does take a long time to come to the final decision, for good reason, because we have to analyze the situation, we have to analyze economic situation, socioeconomic analysis also needed, gather lots of data before we proceed with the action. This is what we call the better regulation as well. But that's why in the fitness check we have addressed this issue, and we in a way hinted that perhaps acting through the groups of substances rather than one by one could be one way to do it. And in fact, fluorinated substances is one example, because right now we have restricted several dozen of them, but there are thousands of fluorinated substances. So going after a bigger group through the so-called grouping approach would allow us to act fast and with less cost, and to do it really more efficiently. As for the substitution, what has been done for by the Commission to reverse the trend, indeed, this is the same, or let's say similar finding that we have observed also under the REACH evaluation. In fact, the numbers are reducing, while it may be a bit misleading outlook that the numbers of hazardous chemicals are on the market is so high. In fact, a lot more chemicals have been classified as hazardous because we have analyzed them and there is a consensus that they are hazardous, which was not case before. As soon as they're classified as such, then there are risk management measures that set in, and this is when the reduction of the exposure to such hazardous substances is kicking in. So this is the process. This is how the whole construct of the chemicals legislation is done and is aimed indeed at reducing the exposure to dangerous substances. Then there was a question, why no action if there are so many issues and problems identified in the fitness check? The purpose of the fitness check was to identify issues, to really cut across and look across more than 40 pieces of law and to see are there issues, and there are issues. These have been identified, but the exercise of the fitness check is not to propose actions, it's to identify the issues, it's really to do the check. The actions are to be outlined in the next phase, and this is for the next Commission to be done. This is what we are waiting as eagerly as you are to see what is the program of the next Commission, what are the precise ideas by the Commissions. That's why, as Carlo Pettinelli said, we cannot say more than we have said right now because we need to wait for the new Commission to come in. But as for the question on non-toxic environment strategy, this is a requirement under the 7th Environmental Action Programme, which, by the way, is still valid until next year. So we still have time to do it. But the trouble with the non-toxic environment strategy is that as it was designed to develop the non-toxic environment strategy, was meant to deal with 4 issues, with nanomaterials, with endocrines, with substances and radicals, with mixtures. And all these are pertinent issues where there is work ongoing in each and every field of them. But as you can see from the fitness check, and if you also remember, or if you had the chance to take a look at the REACH review, as well as many other evaluations and fitness checks that are ongoing or have been finished or will soon be finished, there is a lot more than these 4 issues. And that's why most probably we'll have to have a more far-reaching, or let's say wider outlook and the policy action on this than what the non-toxic environment strategy calls for. But again, this is for the next Commission to say. And this is a possibility that under the zero pollution ambition that has been announced by von der Leyen, these actions will be found there. And I would probably just add to what Carlos said on the compliance with the REACH and the substances that are in compliance with it. Indeed, the action plan is already there, is agreed with the European Chemicals Agency. We are also amending the annexes and the REACH itself through implementing acts, where we will be increasing the checks on the substances 4 times. So there will be heavier scrutiny, and there will be a clarification, legal clarification, by when companies have to improve and update their dossiers in which they characterize the chemicals that they put on the market. That will really improve the compliance with the REACH legislation and will improve also the protection of citizens and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for keeping very succinctly to time. I think you've given a range of answers there that were actually relatively comprehensive for the time that you've been given. But I'm aware that obviously some of the finer points of the questions that my colleagues have asked, they may want to come back on. I've got 2 speakers for the next round. If colleagues who have asked the question wish to ask for a clarification, please do indicate. First, Miriam Daly.
Thank you, Chair. I will look at it from a different point of view, because I do understand that new forms of industrial cooperation between chemicals industries and other industries are emerging and that they are shaping new industrial structures, but we still lack proper emphasis on policies that then facilitate structural change in the chemical sector that truly address environmental health and societal challenges. And we need a chemicals industry that is a strong driver of resource and energy efficiency, and that also contributes to the decarbonization through nanotechnology, bioeconomy, or the reuse of CO2 as a chemical feedstock. But I would like to understand from the Commission how they are seeing the way forward, or how they expect the EU legislation and its implementation to facilitate really and truly and in a concrete manner a new alliance between chemicals, agriculture and waste, first and foremost to offer new business opportunities in the green economy, but also to help make the concept of the circular economy a reality. It is something that we have been working for, and it is something where EU legislation can truly contribute and make sure that we have a situation where the circular economy takes into account the chemicals industry and is something that is beneficial for our citizens across the EU.
Thank you very much. Madame Rivasi.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I've got a whole series of questions because I was on the Pesticides Committee in the previous legislature, and this was on a risk assessment on chemical substances. Now, I was shocked quite a lot by something this summer. That was that EFSA, our food safety agency, made a proposal on a risk assessment for pesticides regarding bees in particular, and they took into account chronic toxicity, in particular, of pesticides over time on both larvae and the bees. Well, the states rejected that in order to minimize the risk assessment with the Commission's complicity, because the Commission had made a proposal that was much lighter. I'd like to get your opinion on that, because that really does illustrate the chemicals and their assessment. I mean, if we carry on like this, we won't have any bees at all. On endocrine disruptors, the French health agency assessed this based on the population. There's a strong involvement of 6 endocrine disruptors. You can see, therefore, that our European regulation is not pertinent, because we know that these disruptors have health consequences, and everyone has them, because they're not just in food, they're not just in consumer goods, they're everywhere. So that means that we are not being rigorous enough to ban these substances. There's something else we're concerned about, and I would like to see an improvement in the legislation. That's on consumer goods. Because when we talk about diapers for toddlers, we can't force industry to admit what's in them. When there was independent bodies who looked into this, we saw that there were pesticide residues, there were endocrine disruptors, so we've got to force that, be this on feminine hygiene products, on diapers, that there be a labeling requirement. And then on nanoparticles, they're everywhere now. They're in our foods, they're in medicines, they're in vaccines, they're everywhere, and we don't know anything about them. So I would really like the Commission to decide that we've got to legislate on nanoparticles. So either we have a nano REACH, when we say that we've improved REACH, well, remember what we said in the Pesticides Committee. We realized that REACH gave the registration. The industry put these chemical substances out into the environment, even if the dossier wasn't complete. There again, we've got to change this. We don't authorize, we don't record them, unless all of the dossiers are complete from industry. We've got huge gaps in the system because you're too lax, you're too nice to the industry. So there's things that need to be changed. And I think that in terms of the Commission and in the Parliament, we are not hard-nosed enough. We're talking about the environment. We're all affected by this, and we're all dying little by little of the cancer epidemic.
Après, Madame Trier-Lenoir, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, thank you to the Bureau of the Committee for putting this important subject on the agenda, and thank you to the Commission for their explanations. Perhaps a bit of a provocative comment. You mentioned your concerns with regard to the industry's hesitations, on which my colleague Michel Rivasi commented, and you also expressed your fears about the isolated initiatives from member states. When you refer to the stakeholders, you refer to governments, industry, and stakeholders beyond the EU. There is one category of people who are able to weigh heavily on industries through their credit cards and on governments by their vote. That's the consumers. As my colleague Peter Leeser said, legislation can be a binary approach, authorization or ban, but it can and should also be made up of information to the main people involved, and that's the consumers and consumer associations. Our pleading for a labeling system along the lines of the Nutri-Score, which they quite rapidly accepted, and which allows us to have information and the public can make decisions based on this about the products they use. My question is, are the European consumer associations active enough in the legislative process to make them pertinent? And have you considered setting up a true system for informing consumers using a score or a labeling approach on the products they use?
Okay, we have 3 speakers who have asked a question in the previous round. I'm going to suggest that if you could keep your questions short, that will give our Commission colleagues sufficient time to answer. Please, Crystal.
Thanks. I will do it very short. First of all, I asked about fast-track procedure when we find dangerous substances. Would you will you recommend us in EU to make a fast-track procedure when we find dangerous substances, individual dangerous substances? I think that could be helpful because it's very complicated to change a whole range of, a whole set of legislation. Second, I'm not sure that I got your message. Will you or will you not stop the Danish government from banning some of these food contact material substances that are migrating into the food? I would like to know that because it's very important. It is the fluoride substances they are trying to ban, and I think it's a good idea since EU is not fast enough on this.
Thank you. Ms. Paulus.
Yes, it's very sure too. I do have to insist on the strategy of non-toxic environment, which was outlined in the 7th Environmental Action Plan as legal requirement. And you're just postponing, and I don't see how postponing will bring us further in ensuring a healthy environment for also people as well as biodiversity. Also, there has been some prolonged discourse about REACH, which is not our subject today, actually, but all the other things which I was just talking about, I was asking for action, not for, well, we will see what the next Commission does. You have spent 4 years scrutinizing all those things, combination effects, endocrine disruptors, inconsistencies in risk management decisions, and you don't have any proposals on which action Commission will take. And I find that pretty, how could I just put it without being rude, but I do expect from Commission to do its job.
Thank you. You were the epitome of politeness. Ms. Hazekamp, please.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to thank the Commission for the answers, but they're still being very vague. One answer on the general chromium 6. Well, that is the problem. Industry finds new legislation excessive, and they lobby strongly against it. The positions are divided. And that's precisely why it's so important that we listen to independent researchers, and not people that, because of political conviction or other reasons, are not independent. I want to ask the Commission, do you agree with the Pesticides Committee? If in the refit there are strong changes necessary, what exactly are you going to do and when?
Finally, Jutta Jutteland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Commission for the answers. But I must agree with colleagues who say that some of the answers were not clear enough because of the serious situation that we face here. And I want to repeat not only what was mentioned by my colleague, that we need to see the long overdue EU strategy for a non-toxic environment. We have waited so long, it's long overdue, and it's not serious that we don't see it presented. And it's really in disrespect to the citizens that needs to know that we take serious their health and the environment protection. And then I also need to highlight the serious situation when it comes to the endocrine disruptors. We have studies that show link to serious diseases and problems with fertility in our member states. And I recently met a professor who talked about a situation where they studied pregnant women and they checked their body during the pregnancy, and the women with higher levels of chemicals with endocrine disrupting for endocrine disruptors, they actually also have problem with the baby's health when they are born. They can see the link. So this is something that we need to protect the citizens from, and for the future generation, this is really something that we will be, people will judge how we behaved, if we protected the babies or not. So I want to see that the Commission delivers not only one area for endocrine disruptors, but all the society. And we need protection in water, in drinking water, in cosmetics, in plastics, in all the daily life that we experience. So please, I want more answers. How will you act when it comes to endocrine disruptors?
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. I'm going to give the floor to the Commission to answer. Obviously, you've heard a lot of concern from colleagues here in this committee. This is an issue of fundamental trust for citizens, of course, to have the confidence in the products they buy and the foods they eat and the water they drink and the exposure to chemicals in the environment that they live in. So I would stress, please do try and answer all of my colleagues' questions as best you can. I appreciate time is short. I know it's difficult, obviously. You've given relatively comprehensive answers in the first round, but I would stress, obviously, if colleagues leave this committee with a sense that there are hanging threads that still have to be dealt with, we don't want to just wait until the new Commission takes office. We want to be sure that there is action being taken. So please, if I can give the floor to the Commission.
Yes, thanks. Before, I would like to make a general consideration. It's not that we don't want to be clear, but the issue is that we cannot anticipate what will be the program of the next Commission, because for the time being, we have only a president elected. In the political guidelines of the president elected, the issue of environment protection of citizens have a prominent part, because we have the European Green Deal that focuses not only on climate but also on the environment. We have other chapters as protecting a European way of life, protecting people. So all these is already in the guidelines, but these are just guidelines. This is not a working program. So for having a working program, for saying what the Commission will do, we need that before there is a Commission that is designated, after the Commission will take office the 1st of November, hopefully, and after we can decide and we can commit on what will be done. For the time being, it's completely impossible for us to say exactly what the Commission will do if we don't know who will be the Commission and if there is not a working program. Anyway, I will try to give more clarification on some questions. First of all, to Mrs. Dalli about the industry. There is still a lot to do on the circular economy, but I think that the work that we have done in the last 5 years is already enormous. 5 years ago, there was a lot of people that even do not know what means circular economy. Under this Commission, it has been done an enormous work. As example, we can think about the plastics. For the plastics, there has been a strategy, an initiative. There has been a legislation, the directive on the single-use plastics and about plastic bottles. That is one of the main concerns for the environment, and they will become not anymore waste, but they will become secondary raw materials. In the framework of the circular economy under this Commission, there has been the communication on the end of waste criteria, from waste to secondary raw materials. So a lot of work has been done, but not everything can be done in 5 years. So this is clearly a priority that is already in the political guidelines of the President-elected to continue this work on the circular economy. Concerning the very specific question about the procedure for bakery papers in Denmark, frankly speaking, I don't know where we are for this procedure, if there is a notification from Denmark for obtaining a derogation, or if there is not. But these are cases that there are hundreds of cases like these in the Commission, and there is a well-established procedure. But I am not aware of this specific case. Et maintenant, je passe à la question qui a été formulée en français.
Now on to the question put in French on labeling for foodstuffs. The Commission has been working for a long time now on labeling for foodstuffs. In Europe, we have very detailed information already, amongst the most advanced in the world, but perhaps what we're missing is a bit of a summary. We have all of the foodstuffs and the ingredients, but we're missing a summary. The Nutri-Score is one of the proposals that's on the table. Our colleagues from DG Santé have already done a study on this. There are different options on the table, not just the Nutri-Score. So I think, once again, it will be up to the new Commission to reach some conclusions on this study, and if deems necessary to create a legislative proposal, it's up to them to decide in which way. Now, again, I can't anticipate what will happen afterwards, but there is a whole lot of work on the background that has been done and over the last few months, and I would expect that the next Commission already has the necessary information to complete this work quickly, and I'll give the floor to my colleague.
Also, rather briefly, I owed also the answer on the waste that was asked before in the previous round. I can only say that the new laws on the waste classification and on the definitions have come into force last year. They still have to be transposed by the member states, and once it's transposed, there will be a lot more clarity on what is this, what is not, what is hazardous waste, what is not. So we have to enforce that legislation. We have to make sure that everybody is doing the right thing, but it's a new law which still has not fully been transposed by the member states, just because there is still time to do it. As regards the Commission being lenient towards pollinators and the declining population of bees, I would like to probably redirect that question again to our colleagues in the health department who are responsible for this, but they only can confirm that indeed there is an alarming decline of the pollinators population in Europe, and it poses an enormous problem, not only for environment, but also for agriculture and for the entire population. So certainly there will have to be action, and the situation is pretty urgent and dire. Lastly, as for, well, probably two more questions. One on nanomaterials was also mentioned by Madame Rivasi. The change of the requirements under the REACH for the registration of substances in nanoforms has just come into force. It's brand new legal requirement which clarifies which nanoforms and in what way they need to be registered under the REACH regulation. And that will really give a lot more information about where nanomaterials are, who they are, and that will also trigger analysis of their properties and if they are dangerous to health and environment or not, in what way. And that will allow us also to act on risk management. On endocrines, these are mentioned by President-elect as one of the topics where she wants to act. This commission adopted a strategy for endocrine disruptors already last year, and there is action ongoing. One of them is a cross-cutting fitness check of all legislation to see where endocrines are addressed, where they are not, or where they should be. Is there consistency? Is there logic into legal intervention? And that result will be very important because it could lead to the changes in the legislation, but we have to wait for that result. In the meantime, we will also be launching a new platform on endocrine disruptors where all the information will be available there. So there will be really a one-stop shop place for everybody who wants to know anything about endocrine disruptors, including studies, the best knowledge that we have. So that will really inform lots of decision making. And we will also be launching a forum with scientists, with various stakeholders, also rather soon in the coming months on endocrine disruptors in order to take forward that discussion and to inform also the fitness check, which, as I said, could eventually lead to legal changes. Thank you.
Thank you. As aware, obviously, of the constraints that you're under and very appreciative of the answers that you've given, nonetheless, obviously, we take note of what you've said. We take note of the promises and priorities that Frau von der Leyen has made in terms of her commitments. Obviously, we will take note of our concerns going forward and the answers you've given in terms of the Commissioner hearings that we will be attending. All I would say is that we do often have a situation, I think, where we find between mandates the outgoing Commission often feels as if it's unable to act in the final year or so of its mandate, preferring to delay until the next mandate. We then, of course, have a period where assessments are undertaken and action often doesn't take place until halfway through the next legislature. And the issues that citizens face simply don't have the luxury of conforming to the parliamentary and Commission timetable that we have. And I think that there has to be a way of making sure that the concerns and issues that we are raising here don't get lost in the transition between Commission mandates. It's my little spiel. Thank you very much. I appreciate it's a tough gig sometimes appearing before the committee, but we're very appreciative of your time and your answers today. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you, colleagues. We'll now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is exchange of views with the European Court of Auditors on the special report number 07/2009, EU Action for Cross-Border Healthcare, Significant Ambitions but Improved Management Required. We'll have an exchange of views with the Director of Chamber 1 at the European Court of Auditors, Mr. Peter Welsh. Again, I'll give colleagues the opportunity. I might have to vacate the chair at some point. Well, I will have to vacate the chair at some point, but obviously it will be a seamless transition, perhaps unlike the Commission presidency. Mr. Welsh, if I could give you 10 minutes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great honour to be here today. If you'll permit me, I'd like to start by congratulating the team who worked on this. I think they did an excellent job. And by thanking the Commission, because I think the Commission's engagement with us was very constructive and professional throughout the process, even when we were not entirely convinced by all the actions they'd taken. I think they did a fantastic good job in engaging with us. I was hoping we'd have a... Yeah, good. I think
you have to have it the other way around.
The other way around?
Yeah.
Good. This is, as it's a relatively new Parliament, it's just a reminder of the role of the European Court of Auditors. We're, of course, involved in checking the accounts, performing performance audits, giving opinions on proposals. I'd like to specifically address the last point. I'm the director of the Chamber, which is responsible for looking at the sustainable use of natural resources. We take a great interest in your work here. And indeed, listening to the last discussion, I was reminded that we produced a report on food safety, looking at the chemicals issue earlier this year, and that we have in progress at the moment a report on pesticides. So I hope they will also be of interest to the committee. And I and my colleagues will be back later in the day to listen to Commissioner Vela, because we also have some work underway under marine diversity. So we take a great interest in your work, and we hope it's relevant to yourselves. This was a report that looked at an area where the Commission and EU legislation are really quite ambitious, and really sought to achieve some significant and difficult to achieve issues. We looked at the implementation of the cross-border health directive in the Member States. We looked at the results achieved so far in terms of cross-border exchanges of e-data, which is something mentioned in the directive, but I think a project which goes back 10 or 12 years now, so a relatively mature project. And also EU actions on rare diseases to see if these add value. And again, that's something which dates back in total about 10 years. Now, this is probably a difficult to read diagram, but it's there just to give an illustration of the complexity of what is trying to be achieved. These show, as best we have them, that the figures for the flows of patients from one jurisdiction to another under the directive. There's some limitations on the figures, of course. I think for the figures for France, which makes up 2/3 of the outgoing patients, I think they're not actually able to distinguish between patients moving under the directive and people moving under the Social Security regulation. One or two member states don't provide the figures, but in total you see that there are some really complex movements to be dealt with here. One or two clearly significant bilateral movements of patients, but a difficult thing to deal with in terms of procedures, but I think possibly above all in terms of IT. This is what we looked at. We looked at the Commission's monitoring of the directive. We looked at what it was doing to facilitate the exchange of patients' health data across borders. And we looked at the initiatives taken for rare diseases, in particular the creation of European reference networks and the EU-wide platform. Here's an overview of what we found, and I will move over this, I think, relatively quickly. But if I had a more ambitious presentation, I could probably put a big green tick across the top one. A little bit harder to put a big green tick against points 2 and points 3. I'll move on to explain what we found here. Information to patients on their rights to cross-border health care. There have been, since the directive came into force, many complaints that the information is incomplete or is unclear to patients. I think that those observations that this committee and that the Parliament took up in February of this year. We understand this. We think that the complexity of the framework does actually make it difficult to explain people their rights when there's more than one piece of legislation that might apply to them. Experts told us that they thought the national contact points could give much better information on access to European reference networks on the rare diseases, and that's something that we've reflected in our report. Our recommendations here are that the Commission should do more and should do more to support the work of the national contact points. We appreciate that there was the 2018 toolbox, which we think has been useful and a positive development in terms of making national contact points more user-friendly, more available to potential patients. But we'd like to see the Commission follow up on the use made of that. And we think the Commission ought to take seriously the suggestions by experts that the European reference networks should be covered by those national contact point websites and should provide some guidance on this issue. So those are our findings and those are our recommendations. On the second point, the cross-border exchanges of health data, here I'm going to express a personal sympathy for the Commission's predicament here, because I think if you think about those complicated flows of patients across borders, it's a very tough job to get this right, and it really requires state-of-the-art project management. We note that the Commission has not achieved what it thought it would achieve in terms of this, and in fact, at the time we finished our report, and I think possibly still it is the case, that actual cross flows of data using this architecture uniquely go from Finland to Estonia. So let's say the widespread use of this architecture hasn't yet transpired. More member states than that are ready to receive data, but there are not many member states. There are in fact no member states at the time we finished our audit equipped to send the data that they were looking for. So, so not as successful as first hoped. And we think that the Commission was probably optimistic at the time of scoping this project and probably optimistic in terms of assessing how difficult it would be to apply. Now, in order to prepare for better cross-border exchanges of health data in the future, I think the Commission will need to engage an independent assessment of what it's done, and to assess whether these e-health actions have actually provided cost-effective and timely solutions and meaningful input to national healthcare systems. I'm aware that there are also some bilateral arrangements between member states, and given the importance of some bilateral flows, that's probably of great significance. Thirdly, I want to move on to the difficult and I think emotive issue of rare diseases. I think we'd all like to see great progress on this. The Commission has had an approach to this dating back at least to 2008. The ERNs have been the dominant strategy since 2014. They face significant challenges to their future financial sustainability. And indeed putting together these networks in terms of organising a process to screen the partners, assessing the work of those partners really does create some difficult administrative tasks. And we're not really clear what the future holds for these networks. They have a current funding framework which is not as clear as it might be, and where we're not sure what the future holds. So what are we looking for? We are really looking for the Commission again to assess the results of its strategy and to decide whether it is the right strategy to go forward with, or whether it needs to be amended either marginally or more significantly. We think it should set out ways forward to address the challenges faced by the networks. And if the networks are to continue in something like their current form, it needs to have a simpler and more transparent funding mechanism. So to summarise, we see some progress in some of the significant areas of putting the directive into place. There's still quite a lot of work to be done. A lot of that is assessment and evaluation of the things that have taken place and an assessment of whether they are the right ways to go forward in the future. I was reading the Parliament's document on this dating back to February, and I find myself agreeing with the Parliament's conclusions that this sort of evaluation needs to take account of the quality of life outcomes for all these, for the patients involved. I hope that this report that we have produced is a useful input to that process and a constructive contribution to the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have... Herr Wolken, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much for this presentation. The implementing report of the Commission has demonstrated that cross-border services in the medical area doesn't really function. And of course, unfortunately, this is something that the Court of Auditors has just confirmed. And I think it's been made quite clear that there were initiatives from the Commission, but the goals were not achieved. For example, better use there has to be better use of these entire systems on behalf of the patients. And I think it's also a question of sustainable use of natural resources. And I think there's quite a lot of potential here in the health sector that we need to exploit more. And most patients don't have sufficient information about their rights in this context. And I think that's why there's so little use of the cross-border health services. And I think the court has demonstrated that there's only really one member state allowing patients to be treated in another. So I think we have to do a lot more to get a genuine single health area. And all in all, I have to say that in the digital sector, much progress improvement is needed. A lot of potential is not being exploited. I'd just like to thank you for the presentation. I can agree with your recommendations and conclusions, and I think we have to really encourage the new Commission to have more ambition in this direction. And thank you very much for your very thorough report.
Nets.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your presentation. I have 3 questions. First of all, I strongly believe that we should establish specialized centers for rare diseases in the European Union, centers that should be fully integrated in the European reference networks. I would be keen to understand which are the real obstacles explaining such a slow rollout of these centers according to you. Secondly, in addition, I really regret that there are 2 systems of cross-border healthcare existing in parallel. How can we then really improve access to information? You were speaking about the national context points, but I think there's still a big work to do in information in order to have access to medicine, medical treatment, especially, and you mentioned them, for patients having rare diseases, but also for all the citizens, in order to guarantee equal chances for diagnosis, treatment, life quality for all patients throughout Europe. Thirdly, finally, some member states expect Commission support in order to have clearer rules on the European reference network concerning patients' referral. There needs such assistance in order also to reach an agreement on the form of support provided by the Member States to the European reference network. Do you think the Commission should then really increase their support? That were my 3 first questions. I have others, but I leave the floor now. Thank you very much in advance for your answers.
Thank you. Madame Collin-Osterley.
Oui, merci. Merci pour votre exposé.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Regarding cross-border healthcare, you stressed that we were ambitious, but it's taking time for the results to filter through to citizens, which is rather a shame. Now, the question has been put regarding how, in practice, we can support patients moving from one state to another. Everything seems to rest on the shoulders of the member states. Not all of them have aligned their health services. So what flanking measures are feasible, given the huge differences from one member state to another? As far as citizens are concerned, they need information regarding the price of drugs and the coverage, how you obtain reimbursement and so forth. That's all the more important if you're talking about a patient affected by a rare disease which is not covered in their home state, for example. For the sake of transparency for citizens and to make sure that enlightened decisions can be taken, how about setting up a protected, specific information system regarding the price of medication in each of the member states, so that it would be easier for decisions in this area to be taken? Do you feel that the current directive makes it possible to do this? Would it feed into it? And is that an idea that the Commission and the Member States would back? Thank you.
Merci bien. Et maintenant, Madame Trier-Lenoir, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir, for your precise and more or less humble presentation on this very crucial topic. The European networks on rare diseases typically represent a domain where the European level is crucially needed for the patients. As a cancer specialist in France, I would give the example of rare cancers, including cancers of the children. For this reason, it is disturbing for me to hear that the future of these networks might be questioned. And I wish to hear more from you on this hesitation. Thank you.
Okay, Madame Spurek, please.
Thank you very much, and thanking the Court of Editors for their valuable report, I would like to highlight one troubling fact. According to the newest Eurostat data, in 2018, 3.9% of the EU citizens of working age resided in an EU country other than that of their citizenship, and yet only less than 0.05% of EU citizens, as the Court's report says, took advantage of the system put in place under the 2011 Cross-Border Health Directive. And in my opinion, this ratio seems to be a very strong proof that the current system effectively discourages citizens from accessing healthcare when in another EU state. I would like to ask the Court if that factor was analyzed while preparing the report. Thank you very much.
Et maintenant, Madame Rivasi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Madame Rivasi, thank you, Chairman. Grateful for that presentation. An initial question sprung to my mind. When you were going through your slides, you showed flows from one member state to another. I would have been grateful for some explanation of those flows of people. For example, why do people from Sweden and Norway go to Spain? Is it because of the price? That's an important piece of information to obtain. Or is it because the hospitals are better? Or because they're actually spending their retirement in Spain? I need some explanation of those flows. And there was nothing regarding France. Is it just that France has declined to provide the information? So we'd like some explanation. And then cross-border care is something I saw in the context of Lyme disease, for example. A lot of French patients went to Germany because of differences regarding diagnosis. They needed a different diagnosis from the one they'd been given in France. And then cross-border flows with certain drugs. There was Poterox. We had problems with that, and people went from France to neighbouring countries to obtain it? Or again, what happens if you've got a shortage of particular drugs? As things are now, in France, we have 600 medications which are in short supply. The reason for that being that you have purchasing groups amongst pharmacists where they prefer to sell the drugs in countries where they can get a higher price. But another reason there's a shortage is that the manufacturers don't want to produce anything on which the patent has expired because they don't make so much money on it. So have you embraced this concern regarding a shortage of medicines? This affects all the member states. And couldn't the Court of Auditors do something along the lines of what has happened in the United States, where they're setting up a public establishment to produce frontline drugs, even the active substances being produced, because 80% of them now are actually manufactured in Asia. So the health safety of patients can no longer be insured. You can't be certain that you're going to get secure supply. So if we want to make sure that these drugs will be available to our patients, we should perhaps emulate the United States and have a similar public production fund. Could you give me your views?
Madam Kopczynska. Oh, sorry. We will have a speaker after you. Madam, please.
Dziękuję, panie przewodniczący, szanowni państwo. Przede wszystkim dziękuję za przygotowany dokument i ogromną pracę Trybunału. Działania Unii Europejskiej.
Thank you for preparing this report. What the European Union has been doing on cross-border healthcare is driven certainly by very ambitious targets, but ones that have not been well implemented. I've perused the Commission's document on this topic, and my own view is that the European Union would be better advised to focus on this cross-border care arrangement. I realise that this may not look that significant when compared with the level of healthcare provided within national borders. Nonetheless, we should pursue the harmonisation of healthcare for the benefit of patients. Now, I realise that everything is geared now towards e-health, the new technologies that can help people access health services. A public health strategy has a direct impact on patients' health. Information is absolutely vital here because e-health technology provides more than just information regarding what's available now, but above all, if we're to make full use of possibilities in the future, you need leading-edge technologies such as online prescriptions and registers of patients are all part of the equation, because this could actually save lives of people who can go to other member states for emergency treatment. Then the doctors would have their whole medical records available online and be in a better position to help them. And then orphan diseases are also extremely important. Interest in those diseases amongst the various operators in the health sector is still on a very low scale. So I'd like to know what's going to happen to these reference networks in the future. How will they plug into the national systems? I think it's going to be politically awkward. Thank you.
Thank you. And forgiveness, Miriam, I did see you and I didn't write you down. I'm very sorry, Miriam Dolly.
I thought you were ignoring me. Grazie ħafna ta' din il-prezent.
Thank you for this presentation. I would like to start by mentioning your last point, where you said a better standard of living for our patients is the ultimate goal for any action taken by ourselves. But I do worry when a main point is that we have patients who cannot tap the full potential of a directive like this one. We have a very small amount of patients who are truly aware of the rights they enjoy when it comes to seeking healthcare outside their country of citizenship. This action needs to be taken on an EU-wide basis. Have you seen any best practices where certain countries have excelled in giving better information? Another point which is problematic to me is the delays in information exchange and data exchange when it comes to patient health records. How can this be addressed? My country sits on the EU's periphery, and I would like to know how patient flows fare from country to country. When you have patients coming from the peripheral member states. A point which was mentioned by several colleagues was that of rare diseases and conditions. We have several million Europeans who suffer from these conditions, but there is the problem of financial sustainability, of how to best help these patients who suffer from rare conditions. You mentioned a financing mechanism which needs to be simpler and more transparent as a solution. I would like further detail on this initiative or proposal and what can help these patients. Thank you.
Grazie ħafna. Please, Mr. Welsh, if you could respond to the questions from my colleagues. There's also potentially an opportunity for Joanna Gligo, the head of unit at DG Santé, to also come in. I have one more colleague. Forgive me, I have one more colleague who wants to come in, and then I'll give the floor to you, Mr. Welsh. Ms. Hazekamp, sorry. Oh no, sorry, I'm sorry, okay. Yes, my brain is a little addled. I might have to vacate the chair very soon, and Ms. Hazekamp will take my place. So if you see a change of personnel, that's what's going on.
I'm extremely happy to go first. I'm also happy that, because I think some of these questions are, in a sense, directed at the Commission. So if the Commission has a preference for coming in first, I'm equally happy with that. I don't know who will be speaking for the Commission. So.
As you wish.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do my best with these very interesting questions. If I can maybe start with the point, I think there's a point actually that a number of people allude to. We'd love to know more about the real flows of patients under this directive, and to be honest, I think also under the regulation. We'd love to do more at that. The team and I personally spent some time looking at these flows, trying to see where people are going, and I mean, to a degree speculating, but trying to speculate in a considered way on what was driving it, because of course you look at those figures, it is not logical that France, which according to the World Health Organization has the best healthcare system in the world, is sending lots of people to be treated elsewhere. It wouldn't seem likely that they were going to all those places in order to get a better standard of healthcare. I mean, it could be the case for individual diseases, but you know that wouldn't seem to be the big driver. So that's. But then France is one of the member states which does not distinguish between the two mechanisms, between the directive and the regulation, to my understanding. So that's difficult. Two-thirds of the figures for treatments in other member states come from one member state which isn't splitting. So you know there's there is a problem with the figures. The Commission made the point in their reply that it is, you know, those of us who live in a member state other than the one we were born who are probably most likely to go back and go home, frankly, to get the treatment. So I think quite a lot of cross-border treatment under the two mechanisms are people who possibly work. I mean, it's unimaginable from these figures that there are people from Estonia working in Finland who get their prescriptions in Finland and present them when they're back in Estonia, and that might be to do with price transparency. It would be fantastically interesting to have more information on that and to have better information on that. But we have to work with the figures as we get them, and the Commission has to work with the figures as they get them. I think Mrs. Metz made a really fundamental point in terms of the complexity of the system as it appears to patients. There are more than one mechanisms for getting reimbursement. It takes becoming a cross-border health problem myself. Excuse me. I think it's asking a lot of patients to understand what these mechanisms are, and I think if I were trying to look in the medium term, I would really want to I would want there to be an evaluation of ways that this framework can be simplified, because I think that would offer really quite a lot. I think that would. Yes, so there's a point also about retirement. I think some of these flows that we see from cold, wet countries to warm, sunny countries. I mean, it is that figure we're seeing. Now, in terms of rollout of the IT systems, firstly, I think there's a point which is not a DG Sante point, it's a broader Commission point that there needs to be some thought about project management for complicated IT projects, and there needs probably to be a better framework for looking at what these are going to cost and what these can practically deliver. I think if you I'm aware that the history of trying to introduce e-health data exchange within member states, because member states themselves can have complicated and diverse health systems within their own borders, just setting it up at a national level can be extremely difficult. I think we make the point somewhere in this report that sometimes when we see a connection between one member state or a planned connection between one member state and another, it does not mean to say that every health provider can necessarily communicate with every, in one member state, can necessarily communicate. It could be a fairly limited number. So there is a tremendously difficult project to run there, if that's the way you decide to run it. And frankly, things move on. I'm wondering whether this sort of centralised approach was something which probably looked modern 10 years ago. I'm not sure it looks modern now. I'm not sure, frankly, that if you came back to this in 5 years' time, you'd say this is the way we're going to solve the problem. So I don't have a solution there, but I don't think the answer to limited success on some of these things is always to devote more resources to it and more time to it. Sometimes it should at least involve the possibility of looking to see if there's another way of solving this problem. I think thematically I've answered the questions that I feel able to answer, though I'm happy to come back on specific points. I would prefer to come back after the Commission has provided their input, if that's at all possible, because they are clearly closer to some of these issues than I am. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your answer. Now we will give the floor to Head of a Unit of DG Sante, Ms. Grigor.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the Court of Auditors for its report, who will be extremely helpful in our work, especially in relation to the member states, because one should not forget that the health is a national competence. And we see this very, very clearly, both when it comes to the exchanges of patient summaries and e-prescriptions, where the development of the national infrastructures and the development of at the national level impacts very importantly on these exchanges, but also when it comes to the European reference networks and the way that they are integrated into the national systems. So we really would like to thank the court, because basically its observations will help us further basically implement the directive. Now, when it comes to the directive itself, we have to remind, as it has already been said, that we have two legal frameworks in place: the Regulation 883 and the directive, which is a complex ecosystem, and we have tried to provide the national contact points for the directive with the specific information related to the interplay between these two legislative pieces, one basically governing the support for care abroad, and as other governing basically the relation of patients traveling or working or residing in another member state. So this also can explain, for instance, the differences in beneficiaries in terms of the regulation of the directive. We see, for instance, around 2 million European health insurance card users who benefited from reimbursement and from the regulation. We see less beneficiaries of the directive seeking planned treatment abroad. But probably these are normal evolutions, and in any case, we are trying to strengthen the support for the national contact points. We have provided a toolbox, translated in all the languages. We are continuing to support the information, including on the European reference networks. On the e-health digital service infrastructure, I think we have to remind from the outset the fact that it is a very novel and complex project of exchanging the data between authorities. It is based on a voluntary basis. 22 member states are supposed to start these exchanges by 2022. It's done in waves. We expect that others, the rest of member states, up to 27, will join this year. There will be a specific Connecting Europe facility financial support for them. All the others are also setting up these infrastructures for the national contact point for e-health. So basically the node in the member states, they are also setting this up with the EU support, with the money from the CEF, from the Connecting Europe facility. But again, the level of development depends very much on the development of the infrastructures at the national level. And recently, some member states have passed a law asking for the introduction of the electronic health records, so the situation is very, very diverse. Of course, we have the front runners that have started exchanging the data. We are monitoring this on a quarterly basis. At the end of the second quarter, we had information, especially from Finland and Estonia. At that point in time, we had like 2,700 e-prescription already dispensed for Finnish citizens in Estonia. In the meantime, from bilateral contacts, we found out that this has increased to over 4,000 e-prescriptions, 4,230 to be more precise. But the information about the Luxembourg, Czech Republic, and Croatia concerning the exchange of e-prescription and patient summary will have more in the quarterly reporting that will come in this autumn. Malta and Portugal, they have also received the green light from the e-health network to start this exchange. So now they are working to pass to production phase, as it is called in our jargon. And we will hopefully will be able to report more in the upcoming months, basically, about these exchanges. It's clear that the situation is also the interoperability situation is quite uneven. We are trying also to support the member states on how to exchange the electronic health records. This is why we have provided the electronic health record exchange format recommendation about the standard specifications, but also about the conditions that would ensure these exchanges in a secure way. We expect that when basically this exchange of images, lab results, and discharge letter will be implemented, we can see also a rise in this exchange of electronic health records. Maybe not between all the member states, but at least between the frontier member states, because these exchanges of information could basically contribute to savings in terms of avoiding to repeat several exams, savings in terms of avoiding lab results, complicated scans, etc. On the ERN indeed is a complex project, a project which for the time being we have over 300 hospitals grouped in 24 ERNs with over 900 sections. We are now in a process of affiliated partners, of getting affiliated partners, which are basically hospitals that act as a reference point for the patients with the rare diseases in order to support a better coverage at the national level of the ERNs. I think we have over 200 healthcare providers from several member states, and this process continues. We are also going to launch in the upcoming weeks basically a call for the new members, but it is clear that this is a process which has to be supported at the national level. We are supporting the ERNs with an IT tool where they can discuss cases of rare disease patients, and we already have over 740 panels for discussing these cases. Over 2,000 doctors are connected to the system and they are exchanging information. We are working with them to try to make the system more agile, more customized for their needs. We are also working with the coordinators and with the board of member states in order to support the ENS with integration in the national healthcare system. And in June, the board of member states has adopted the statement on the integration of the ERNs. We are supporting them on the monitoring, but this is basically a constant exercise which will develop, and it will take time in order to see how the ERNs are producing results. We'll also have an evaluation of the ERNs in 2020 to 2023. We are also working them to support in the research and development, because one of the important parts of these ERNs is their added value for the research on the rare diseases in Europe. Of course, these are not simple elements, and again, I cannot emphasize enough the role of the member states, and I cannot emphasize enough your role in supporting this work at the national level. In terms of the financing, the European Social Fund Plus has a provision concerning the support of the ERNs for the of the ERN coordinators actually for the administrative support. They get around 1 million euros over 5 years, so 200,000 per year, which is not massive money, and this is why the efforts of the member states who are supporting the coordinators nationally, and I would quote, for instance, France, but also Germany, Belgium, other member states who are doing this in a systematic manner, all these efforts are very welcome, and they are very welcome by the coordinators and by the patients and by the patient organizations. The European, the MFF also in the Digital Euro program foresees the continuation of the support for the IT infrastructure. We are already supporting them through the Connective Euro facility, both at the European level to set up this IT system, but also at the coordinating level, at coordinators level to set up help desks for the hospitals. Again, it's a complex, it's an innovative project in which basically the Commission, the Member States and the coordinators and you are basically advancing hand in hand for the benefit of the rare disease patients. And We have to continue on this path because the results so far are encouraging, but it's clear that we have a lot of challenges ahead and we cannot, only at the level of the Commission, address them. We need everybody on board. And I hope that the report of the European Court of Auditors and your support will help us advance in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm looking around. Are there members who still have a question or a question unanswered? I see at least one, Mr. Busoy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentations and for the positive involvement in order to increase the patient mobility inside the European Union. I believe that cross-border healthcare and the possibility of a European citizen to seek health care and to be partially or totally reimbursed for this is one of the most practical and concrete advantages and achievements in the last years in the area of health. And it is very important to have a proper and a good implementation of the directive. There are two big barriers in face of patients which need healthcare services in another member states other than his origin. One is the system of reimbursement, and the situation is varying very much among member states. Of course, it is also directly related to the possibilities and to the budgets of the member states. I was for 1 year the president of the National Health Insurance House in Romania, and the budget available for reimbursement for treatments abroad was very low, and I am sure and I know that this is a situation in some other member states. But still, beside budget, in some member states, the procedures, the bureaucracy are very difficult, and many of the patients are simply quitting to ask reimbursement, mainly for small amounts of money. And the other big barrier is prior authorization. And here it's important to assess continuously the situation and to see in which cases the prior authorization is requested with no real reason behind this. Otherwise, of course, European reference network is a success story. E-health system is developing in many member states, and it is right, the big challenge in the future will be the interconnectivity and interoperability between these systems, because when we'll have a situation where we can interconnect European health records from European countries, then the quality and the effectiveness of the services will increase a lot for those patients which are seeking healthcare services in more than one member state. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. I think your statement was partially answered already. I'm looking at the speakers. Any one of you want to respond to this one?
Maybe in terms of support for the member states to deal with the reimbursement system, what we are currently doing in the Commission, we have bilateral dialogues, we have also best practice workshops, and ultimately where the implementation of the directive is not satisfactory, infringements. And maybe one element related to a series of intervention before related to the orphan drugs, I can only say that, of course, this is not covered by the directive, but the Commission is working on evaluating the orphan drug legislation.
Thank you very much. I see one last remark from you, Ms. Metz.
I just have very short two last questions. I was wondering if the European reference network, why is it
could not there be a very strong recommendation of the Commission that the European reference network should be integrated officially in the healthcare systems? Then we had sustainability concerning financing, etc. So that was a question to the Commission and to the European Court of Auditors. I was wondering, because there was the question of my colleague in front, if you made an analysis of the pros and cons of these pre-authorizations, because it could also have, I could also say, arguments in favor of a pre-authorization. Did you analyze this question of the pre-authorization? Of course, it also limited the freedom to move throughout Europe to get your treatment, etc. But did you analyze that question? And that was my very last one. Thank you very much.
Okay, very briefly, please.
Very briefly. Firstly, I neglected before to talk about best practice in terms of providing information. The team tell me that they thought Sweden was pretty good at providing information to patients, and particularly telling them what was going to happen later in the process. I agree that there are definitely issues about the different ways that you get reimbursed in different member states, and that this has an impact on the pre-authorization. Frankly, I don't see a way around this, because healthcare is national competence, and if member states choose to have different ways of organising their healthcare systems, there are going to be difficult things at the borders. I noticed that very many member states do have a rare diseases strategy, and we have thought carefully about that. It would be interesting to see how many member states' rare diseases strategy involve a degree of cross-border cooperation for themselves. I think actually there may be some scope to promote this as an aspect of national policies. I think those are the points that I wanted to make, and I'm sure the Commission have got something else to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I see no other questions, so I think we can conclude this point. It is of great importance, the cross-border healthcare for this committee, so I assume we will further speak about this in the future a lot. I just want to, before I close the meeting, say that we will start again at 2:30 with the exchange of views with the Commissioner Vella about biodiversity, and just want to say enjoy your lunch and see you this afternoon. Bye.